The rain hammered against the tall windows of Morrison and Associates, as if the very heavens were mourning grandmother Eleanor's passing. I sat in the burgundy leather chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to ignore the way my stepmother, Victoria, kept shooting daggers at me from across the polished mahogany conference table. The law office smelled of old books and expensive cologne, a scent that would forever remind me of this moment when everything changed. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Morrison said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he pulled a thick manila envelope from his desk drawer. His voice carried the weight of 40 years practicing estate law, each word measured and deliberate. "I know this is a difficult time for the family, but Eleanor was very specific about when and how her will should be read." I glanced around the table at the assembled family members. My father, James, sat rigid in his chair, his face an unreadable mask that I'd learned to decipher over the years. He was nervous. His left hand kept tapping that familiar rhythm against his thigh that always appeared when he was anxious about money. Victoria, his wife of 8 years, and my stepmother, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed impatiently against her designer handbag, and her lips were pressed into that thin line that meant she was calculating something. My half-brother Marcus, Victoria's son from her first marriage, slouched in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never worked a day in his life. At 26, he still lived in the pool house behind our family home, spending his days playing video games and his nights burning through his monthly allowance at downtown clubs. The way he kept checking his phone told me he considered this whole proceeding a waste of his valuable time. Then there was Aunt Diane, grandmother's youngest daughter, who'd flown in from Phoenix for the funeral. She sat quietly beside her husband Robert, both of them looking genuinely sad about losing Eleanor. They were the only ones in the room who seemed to be here out of love rather than expectation. "Eleanor came to me 6 months ago to update her will," Mr. Morrison continued, breaking the wax seal on the envelope with practiced precision. "She was very clear about her intentions and took great care to ensure everything was legally sound." Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 6 months ago was right around the time she'd started pushing grandmother to move into an assisted living facility. For her own safety, she'd claimed, though everyone knew it was really about getting access to the house and whatever assets Eleanor might have hidden away. "She also wanted me to tell you all that she loved you very much," the lawyer added, his stern expression softening slightly. "Even when she disagreed with your choices, her love never wavered." That comment felt directed at me, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. Grandmother Eleanor had been the one constant in my life after my mother died when I was 12. While my father threw himself into work and eventually into Victoria's arms, Eleanor had been there for every school play, every broken heart, every achievement. She'd taught me to garden, to cook her famous apple pie, and most importantly, to stand up for myself, even when the whole world seemed against me. The past 2 years had been particularly hard. Ever since I'd started college and Victoria realized I wasn't going anywhere, the tension in our house had become suffocating. Victoria had made it clear that she considered me an obstacle to her perfect little family unit. She wanted my father's attention focused solely on her and Marcus, and my presence was an unwelcome reminder of his previous life. "The will is quite straightforward," Mr. Morrison said, unfolding the document. "To my dear daughter Diane, I leave my jewelry collection and my grandmother's china set, knowing you will treasure these family heirlooms as I have." Aunt Diane smiled through her tears and squeezed Robert's hand. "To my son James, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my complete forgiveness for all the Sunday dinners he missed over the years." My father's face flushed red. He'd always felt guilty about not visiting grandmother more often, especially after he married Victoria. My stepmother had never liked Eleanor, claiming she was interfering and judgmental, and she'd gradually convinced my father to limit their visits. "To Marcus Caldwell," Mr. Morrison continued, and I noticed Victoria sit up straighter in her chair. "I leave my collection of first edition books, hoping that they might inspire him to develop a love of reading." Marcus snorted quietly. "He'd probably sell them within a week." "To Victoria Caldwell," the lawyer's voice took on a slightly cooler tone, "I leave my sincere hopes that she will find peace and contentment in her life." Victoria's face turned ashen. "That's it?" she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr." Morrison looked at her over his glasses. "Please allow me to finish." The room fell silent, except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. I could feel my heart pounding as the lawyer's eyes found mine. "And finally, to my beloved granddaughter Sarah, who has been the light of my life since the day she was born, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my house at 1247 Maple Street, along with all its contents, my investment portfolio managed by Henderson Financial, my savings accounts at First National Bank, and any other assets I may possess at the time of my death." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Victoria's face had gone from ashen to purple, and Marcus was staring at me like I'd just sprouted a second head. My father looked stunned, his mouth slightly open as he processed what he'd just heard. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Could you repeat that last part?" Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. "Eleanor has left the bulk of her estate to Sarah. This includes the family home, her investments, and her savings accounts." "How much are we talking about?" Marcus demanded, finally putting his phone down. The lawyer consulted another document. "The house is worth approximately $400,000. The investment portfolio is currently valued at around $350,000, and there's roughly $200,000 in various savings accounts. Of course, there will be taxes and fees to consider, but the net value is substantial." I felt like I was floating outside my body. Nearly $1 million. Grandmother had left me nearly $1 million. I'd known she was comfortable. She'd lived in the same house for 40 years and had been careful with money. But I'd never imagined anything like this. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Eleanor was clearly not in her right mind. She was 87 years old, for God's sake. She probably had dementia. "Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Morrison's voice carried a warning tone, "I can assure you that Eleanor was completely lucid when she made these arrangements. I insisted on a cognitive assessment before we proceeded, given the size of the estate. She passed with flying colors. But Sarah's just a kid." Victoria's composure was cracking. "She's 20 years old. What does she need with a house and all that money?" "I'm 21, actually," I said quietly. "My birthday was last month." "Don't get smart with me," Victoria snapped. "This is clearly a mistake. Eleanor always said family takes care of family. She wouldn't have left everything to one person." Mr. Morrison's expression hardened. "I have to remind you that this is a legal proceeding, Mrs. Caldwell. Eleanor's wishes are clearly stated and legally binding." "We'll contest it," Victoria said, grabbing her purse. "This whole thing is obviously invalid. A woman that age doesn't just suddenly change her will and leave everything to one person. Sarah must have manipulated her, filled her head with lies about the rest of us." "That's enough," my father said finally, finding his voice. "Victoria, sit down." "I will not sit down. That little—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but we all knew where it was headed. "She's been poisoning Eleanor against us for years. Always running over there, playing the perfect granddaughter, making the rest of us look bad. Maybe if you'd actually visited her once in a while instead of just calling when you needed money, she might have left you something more meaningful," Aunt Diane said sharply. Victoria whirled on her. "Oh, please. Don't pretend you're not thrilled about this. Your daughter gets almost $1 million and you act like it's perfectly normal. Sarah spent time with my mother. She cared about her. She earned whatever Eleanor decided to give." "Her? Earned it?" Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "By what? Being born first? By having her father wrapped around her little finger? By making sure Eleanor never got close to Marcus?" "Mrs. Caldwell," Mr. Morrison interrupted firmly, "I understand you're upset, but I need to remind you that contesting a will is a serious matter. You would need to prove either undue influence or diminished capacity, neither of which exists. In this case, Eleanor was evaluated by 2 independent physicians, and there's extensive documentation of her mental clarity." Victoria's hands were shaking with rage. "There has to be a way. This isn't fair. Marcus is her step-grandson too. He deserves something more than a bunch of dusty books." Perhaps, the lawyer said carefully, but inheritance isn't about fairness. It's about the deceased person's wishes. Eleanor was very clear about hers. I looked at my father, expecting him to say something, to defend me or at least calm Victoria down, but he just sat there, staring at the table. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head, probably calculating how this would affect his own financial situation. "How long does Sarah have to claim the inheritance?" Victoria asked suddenly, and something in her tone made me pay attention. "The estate will go through probate, which typically takes several months, but there's no time limit on claiming it, assuming she wants to accept." "And if she were to disclaim the inheritance? What would happen then?" Mr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. "If Sarah were to disclaim her inheritance, it would pass to the next beneficiary in line, according to the will's residuary clause. In this case, that would be James, as Eleanor's son." I felt a chill run down my spine. Victoria wasn't just angry, she was scheming. I could practically see her mind working, trying to figure out how to pressure me into giving up my inheritance. "Sarah," my father said finally, "this is a lot to process. Maybe we should all go home and think about this." "There's nothing to think about," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Grandmother left this to me because she wanted me to have it. I'm not going to disclaim it." Victoria's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. Family is more important than money. If you take this inheritance, you'll be tearing this family apart." "I'm not taking anything," I replied. "Grandmother gave it to me. There's a difference." "We'll see about that," Victoria muttered, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The meeting concluded with arrangements for the probate process and the reading of some minor codicils. As we filed out of the office, Victoria grabbed my arm in the hallway. "Listen to me very carefully," she hissed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "That money belongs to this family, not just to you. Eleanor was old and confused, and you took advantage of her. If you know what's good for you, you'll do the right thing and share that inheritance." "Let go of me," I said, pulling my arm away. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Well, let me tell you something. That will isn't worth the paper it's printed on. I'll make sure of it." As I walked to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's threats weren't empty. She'd been planning something from the moment she heard the will read, and I had a terrible feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still gathered overhead, promising more storms to come. 3 weeks had passed since the reading of Grandmother's will, and the tension in our house had become so thick you could cut it with a knife. Victoria had barely spoken to me during that time, communicating only through icy stares and passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children who forget where they come from. My father had retreated into his work, staying late at the office and avoiding the brewing storm at home with the dedication of a man who'd perfected the art of conflict avoidance. The probate process was moving forward slowly, as Mr. Morrison had warned it would. I'd received a thick packet of documents to sign, each one feeling more surreal than the last. Property transfers, bank account authorizations, investment portfolio management agreements. It was like being handed the keys to a life I'd never imagined having. I was sitting at the kitchen table on a gray Saturday morning, reviewing the latest batch of paperwork when Victoria finally made her move. She'd been unusually quiet for the past few days, which should have been my first warning sign. Victoria was never quiet unless she was planning something. "Sarah," she said, her voice deceptively sweet as she glided into the kitchen wearing her silk robe and perfectly applied makeup, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. "We need to talk." I looked up from the documents, immediately on guard. "About what?" "About this whole inheritance situation. I've been thinking, and I believe we can work something out that's fair for everyone." She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table in what I'd learned was her reasonable adult pose. It was the same position she'd used when trying to convince my father that I should pay rent while living at home during college, or when she'd suggested that maybe I'd be happier living in the dorms full-time. "There's nothing to work out," I said carefully. "The will was pretty clear." Victoria's smile tightened at the edges. "Oh, sweetheart, you're so young. You don't understand how these things really work. Family dynamics, financial responsibility, the importance of keeping everyone happy. I understand that grandmother left me her estate because she wanted me to have it. But did she really?" Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on that concerned motherly tone that always made my skin crawl. "Think about it logically. Your grandmother was an old woman, living alone, probably lonely and confused. You were the only one who visited regularly. Don't you think it's possible that she felt pressured to reward that attention?" I felt my temper rising, but tried to keep my voice level. "I visited her because I loved her, not because I wanted her money." "I'm sure you did love her," Victoria said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But the fact remains that nearly $1 million is an enormous responsibility for someone your age. You're still in college, Sarah. You don't have any real-world experience with money management or property ownership." "I can learn," Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Can you? Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain a house that size? Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, repairs. That beautiful house your grandmother loved so much could eat through your inheritance in just a few years if you don't know what you're doing." She wasn't wrong about the expenses, and I could tell from her expression that she knew she'd hit a nerve. I'd been worrying about exactly those things for weeks, wondering if I was equipped to handle such a huge responsibility. "That's why I have a proposal," Victoria continued, sensing my uncertainty. "What if we kept the house in the family but shared the responsibility? Your father and I have been married for 8 years now. We have experience with property management, investments, financial planning. We could help you make smart decisions." "What kind of help are we talking about?" "Well, for starters, we could all live in the house together. It's certainly big enough. You could have your own wing, complete privacy, but you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining such a large property on your own. We'd split the costs, naturally, and your father and I could handle all the tedious business aspects." I stared at her, trying to process what she was really suggesting. "You want to move into grandmother's house?" "It makes perfect sense," Victoria said, her enthusiasm growing as she warmed to her pitch. "The house is paid off, so there's no mortgage. The location is perfect. Closer to your father's office, better schools for when Marcus decides to finish his degree. And you'd have built-in support for managing your inheritance." "What about Marcus? Would he be living there too?" "Of course. He's family. The idea of Marcus living in grandmother's house, probably throwing parties in her beautiful garden and treating her carefully preserved home like his personal fraternity house, made me feel physically sick. "I don't think that's what grandmother had in mind when she left me the house," I said. Victoria's mask of reasonableness slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculation underneath. "Sarah, I'm trying to help you here. But if you insist on being stubborn about this, there are other options." "Such as?" "Well, we could contest the will. I've spoken to several attorneys, and they seem to think we have a strong case. Undue influence, diminished capacity. There are precedents for overturning wills when elderly people are manipulated by relatives who spend time with them specifically to gain financially." The accusation hit me like a slap. "I never manipulated grandmother. I spent time with her because she was my grandmother and I loved her." "I'm sure that's how you see it," Victoria said with false sympathy. "But how would it look to a jury? A young woman in college, probably struggling with money, suddenly becoming very attentive to her wealthy grandmother right around the time the old woman changes her will, especially when there are other family members who've been excluded. Other family members who never visited her, never called her, never showed any interest in her life until they found out she had money." Victoria's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. "That's not fair, and you know it. Your father works 60 hours a week to support this family. I have my own responsibilities. We can't all be professional grandchildren." "Professional grandchildren? Oh, please, don't act like you don't know what I mean. The way you always made sure to be there for every little thing, her doctor's appointments, her grocery shopping, her garden club meetings. You made the rest of us look bad on purpose." I stood up from the table, gathering my papers. I'm not having this conversation anymore. Sit down. Victoria's voice turned sharp. We're not finished. Yes, we are. Sarah, I'm trying to be reasonable. Here, but my patience has limits. That money doesn't just belong to you, it belongs to this family. Your father is Eleanor's son, her only son. By rights, he should have inherited the bulk of the estate, but he didn't. Grandmother made her choice. The choice influenced by a manipulative little girl who knew exactly what she was doing. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I could see we'd moved past any pretense of family harmony into open warfare territory. Where's my father? I asked. Does he know about this conversation? Your father agrees that the current situation isn't sustainable, Victoria said, though something in her tone made me doubt that. I want to hear that from him. He's at the office, Saturday meetings with the Henderson portfolio managers. Victoria's smile was sharp as knives. Interesting timing, don't you think? Right when you're supposed to be transferring your grandmother's investment accounts to their management. A chill ran down my spine. What are you talking about? Oh, didn't I mention? James is meeting with them today to discuss your inheritance. As your father, he has certain legal responsibilities to ensure you're making sound financial decisions, especially since you're still technically a dependent. I'm 21 years old. I'm not a dependent. Are you? Victoria tilted her head. You live in our house, eat our food, drive a car that's insured under our policy. Legally speaking, you might be surprised what kind of influence your father still has over your financial decisions. I felt the walls closing in around me. I'd been so focused on the inheritance itself that I hadn't considered all the ways Victoria and my father might try to control it even after I legally received it. I need to make some phone calls, I said, starting toward the stairs. Sarah, Victoria's voice stopped me at the doorway. I really hope you'll reconsider my proposal. It would be so much easier if we could work this out as a family. The alternative, well, let's just say contested wills can get very ugly, very expensive, and very public. Are you really prepared for everyone in town to know the details of your relationship with your grandmother? Every gift she gave you, every time you asked her for money, every private conversation you had about the rest of the family? The threat was clear. Victoria was prepared to drag grandmother's memory and my relationship with her through the mud if I didn't cooperate. I'll think about it, I lied, just to get out of the room. I made it to my bedroom and closed the door before the tears started. Victoria was right about one thing. I was young and inexperienced, but grandmother hadn't been confused or manipulated. She'd been sharp as a tack right up until the end, and she'd made her decision for reasons that had nothing to do with my visits and everything to do with who she thought would honor her memory and use her legacy wisely. I called Mr. Morrison's office, but got his answering service. Apparently, even estate lawyers took weekends off. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible, then sat on my bed trying to figure out my next move. That's when I heard raised voices from downstairs. My father had come home, and Victoria was filling him in on our conversation. I crept to the top of the stairs, feeling guilty about eavesdropping, but needing to know what I was up against. Completely unreasonable, Victoria was saying. She refuses to even consider sharing the inheritance. James, your mother left her nearly $1 million while giving you $50,000. How is that fair? It's what Mom wanted. My father's voice sounded tired. What she wanted? Or what Sarah convinced her she wanted? James, think about this logically. Your daughter spent 2 years practically living at your mother's house. Don't you find it suspicious that right around that time, Eleanor suddenly decided to change a will that had been in place for 20 years? Sarah loved her grandmother. She wasn't scheming for money. How can you be so naive? Victoria's voice rose in frustration. She played the perfect granddaughter while making the rest of us look like we didn't care. She manipulated a lonely old woman, and now she's going to benefit from it while the real family gets scraps. Victoria, enough. No, not enough. I won't stand by and watch your daughter steal what rightfully belongs to this family. If you won't do something about it, I will. What's that supposed to mean? There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. It means I've already started the process of contesting the will. I I've retained Patricia Kellerman. You know, the attorney who handled the Morrison divorce. She specializes in cases involving elder abuse and undue influence. You did what? My father's voice exploded through the house. I'm protecting our family's interests. Someone has to. Without discussing it with me first? You've made it clear you won't take action, so I had to. James, that girl is going to take everything your mother worked for and probably blow it on. Clothes and parties and whatever else college kids waste money on. Is that really what you want Eleanor's legacy to be? I couldn't listen anymore. I retreated to my room and closed the door, my heart pounding. Victoria hadn't just threatened to contest the will. She'd already started the process. She was serious about destroying grandmother's wishes and my inheritance to get what she thought she deserved. I spent the rest of the day calling every lawyer in the phone book, trying to find someone who could represent me in a will contest. Most of them were closed for the weekend, but the few I reached told me the same thing. Contested wills were expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. Even if I won, the legal fees could eat up a significant portion of the inheritance. By Sunday evening, I felt like I was drowning. Victoria had the advantage of experience, money, and a clear plan of attack. All I had was the truth, and as I was learning, truth didn't always win in legal battles. That's when my father finally came to my room. He knocked softly and waited for permission to enter, something he hadn't done since I was a child. Sarah, we need to talk. He looked awful, tired, stressed, and older than his 52 years. He sat heavily in my desk chair, running his hands through his thinning hair. I want you to know that I didn't approve of Victoria contesting the will, he said. She did that on her own. But you're not going to stop her? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can. We're married, Sarah. Her legal actions affect me too. So you're choosing her over me. It's not that simple, isn't it? I could hear the hurt in my own voice. Grandmother left me her estate because she knew I'd take care of it because she trusted me. Victoria wants to take it away from me, and you're letting her. Victoria has a point about some things, my father said reluctantly. You are very young for this kind of responsibility. Maybe some kind of trust arrangement, with oversight. With Victoria as trustee, I suppose. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Dad, I loved grandmother. I spent time with her because she was lonely and because I enjoyed her company, not because I wanted her money. I know you loved her. But Sarah, you have to understand how this looks from the outside. The timing, the amount of the inheritance, the fact that she essentially cut out the rest of the family. She gave you $50,000. She gave Aunt Diane jewelry in China. She only cut out the people who never cared about her in the first place. My father flinched. That's not fair. Neither is contesting her will because you don't like what it says. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, my father stood up. I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. But I can't control Victoria, and I can't undo what she's already set in motion. Maybe it's for the best. Maybe a judge should decide what's fair. After he left, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. Grandmother was gone. My father was choosing his wife over his daughter, and I was about to face a legal battle that could destroy both my inheritance and my family relationships. But as I thought about grandmother, about her strength, her principles, her refusal to be bullied or manipulated, I felt something hardening inside me. Victoria might have experience and money and a ruthless attorney, but I had something she didn't. I knew I was fighting for something grandmother had truly wanted. The battle lines were drawn. Now I just had to figure out how to win a war I'd never wanted to fight. The next morning I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since this whole nightmare began. Victoria might have started a legal war, but I wasn't going to surrender without a fight. If she wanted to question grandmother's mental capacity and my relationship with her, then I needed evidence, letters, photos, anything that could prove the depth of our bond and Eleanor's clear thinking in her final months. I drove to grandmother's house on Maple Street, using the key Mr. Morrison had given me during the probate process. The house felt different now that it was officially mine. Not just a place I visited, but a responsibility I was inheriting. The morning light streaming through the lace curtains in the living room illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. And the silence was so complete I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Everything was exactly as grandmother had left it. Her reading glasses were still on the side table next to her favorite armchair, folded on top of a half-finished crossword puzzle. Her coffee cup sat in the kitchen sink, unwashed, with a faint ring of lipstick still visible on the rim. It was like she'd just stepped out to check the mail and would be back any moment. I'd been putting off going through her personal belongings, partly because it felt like such a final act, and partly because I'd been so overwhelmed with the legal aspects of the inheritance. But now I had a purpose beyond grief. I needed to build a case for why grandmother's will should stand exactly as she'd written it. I started in her bedroom, going through the antique secretary desk where she'd kept her important papers. Most of it was routine: utility bills, bank statements, correspondence with her financial advisor. But tucked in the back of one drawer, I found a manila folder labeled Sarah in grandmother's careful handwriting. My heart rate quickened as I opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs spanning my entire life. Birthday parties, school plays, graduations, just candid shots of us together in her garden or kitchen. But more importantly, there were letters. Lots of letters. They weren't letters she'd sent to me, but drafts of letters she'd apparently never mailed. Some were to my father, expressing her disappointment with his marriage and his growing distance from the family. Others were to Victoria herself, much more blunt than anything grandmother had ever said aloud. One letter, dated just 6 months before her death, made me sit down hard in her desk chair. Dear Victoria, I know you think I'm a foolish old woman who doesn't understand the modern family dynamic, as you like to put it. But I understand more than you think I do. I see how you look at this house, how you calculate its value when you think no one is watching. I see how you've slowly isolated James from his family, convincing him that spending time with his mother is somehow disloyal to his wife. Most of all, I see how you treat Sarah. The small cruelties, the constant undermining, the way you make her feel unwelcome in her own father's house. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That child has been through enough, losing her mother so young. She doesn't deserve to be made to feel like an intruder in her own family. You want to know why I changed my will? It wasn't because Sarah manipulated me, as I'm sure you'll claim. It was because I watched you try to manipulate everyone else, and I decided my legacy wouldn't be part of your games. I hope someday you'll understand that love isn't a zero-sum game. Sarah's relationship with me didn't take anything away from James. If anything, it should have brought our family closer together. Instead, you saw it as a threat to be eliminated. I pray I'm wrong about your character. For James's sake and for the sake of the family, I hope you prove me wrong. Eleanor. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. Grandmother had understood exactly what was happening in our family dynamic. She'd seen through Victoria's manipulations and made her decision about the will accordingly. This letter was proof that her decision hadn't been made lightly or under any kind of undue influence. I spent the next 2 hours going through every drawer, every file, every scrap of paper in the bedroom. I found more evidence of grandmother's sharp mental state, detailed financial records she'd kept herself, correspondence with her investment advisor showing she was actively managing her portfolio right up until her death, and a notebook where she'd been tracking the stock market with remarkable accuracy. But it was when I decided to venture into the attic that I found something truly unexpected. The attic access was through a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I'd never been up there before. Grandmother had always discouraged it, saying it was just full of old junk and too dangerous for anyone but professional cleaners. But now that it was my house, my responsibility, I felt I should at least see what was up there. The attic was larger than I'd expected, running the full length of the house. Late afternoon light filtered through small windows at each end, illuminating boxes stacked along the walls and old furniture covered with dust sheets. It smelled of cedar and old wood, with that particular mustiness that comes from decades of stored memories. Most of the boxes were clearly labeled in grandmother's handwriting: Christmas decorations, James's school papers, photo albums, 1960, 1980. Normal attic stuff. But as I made my way toward the far end of the space, something caught my eye. In the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, was an old steamer trunk. Unlike everything else in the attic, it didn't have a layer of dust on it. Someone had been accessing it recently. The trunk wasn't locked, though it looked like it had been at some point. There were scratches around the latch suggesting it had been forced open. Inside, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. Financial documents, dozens of them. Bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of. Investment portfolios with different companies than the ones Mr. Morrison had mentioned, and property deeds for land in 3 different states. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the name on all the accounts: Victoria Caldwell. I sat back on my heels trying to process what I was seeing. These were secret accounts that Victoria had somehow connected to grandmother's estate. Some of the statements went back years, and the amounts were staggering. There was over $200,000 spread across various accounts, all in Victoria's name, but somehow tied to grandmother's social security number and financial information. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in an old silk scarf, I found a small tape recorder, the kind grandmother used to use for recording grocery lists and reminders to herself. There was a tape in it, and with trembling hands I pressed play. Grandmother's voice filled the dusty attic, clear and strong. If anyone is listening to this, it means something has happened to me, and someone has finally discovered what I've been hiding up here. I pray it's Sarah who finds this, because she's the only one I trust to handle it properly. Victoria has been stealing from me for 3 years. She started small, using my credit cards for purchases she claimed were for household items when James was between jobs. Then she graduated to forging my signature on checks. When I confronted her about it, she threatened to convince James to have me declared incompetent and committed to a nursing home. I've been documenting everything, gathering evidence, every forged signature, every unauthorized transaction, every account she opened using my information. I should have gone to the police, but I couldn't bear the thought of destroying James's marriage and putting him through that scandal. Instead, I decided to handle it my own way. I changed my will to protect my true legacy from her theft, and I've been quietly gathering evidence in case she tries to challenge my decision. If she contests the will, if she claims I was incompetent or that Sarah manipulated me, then Sarah will have everything she needs to not only defend the will, but to press criminal charges for financial fraud and elder abuse. Victoria thinks she's been so clever, but I know about every stolen penny, and now Sarah will know too. The recording continued for another 20 minutes, with grandmother methodically detailing Victoria's thefts and explaining where she'd hidden additional evidence. She'd been building a case against Victoria for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. I sat in the dusty attic as the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, holding proof that Victoria wasn't just greedy. She was a criminal. The woman who was trying to paint me as a manipulative gold digger had been systematically stealing from my grandmother for years. But grandmother had been smarter than any of us realized. She'd not only protected her assets by changing her will, she'd also set a trap for Victoria. By contesting the will and claiming that grandmother was incompetent, Victoria had walked right into it. I carefully gathered all the documents and the tape recorder, my mind racing with the implications. This changed everything. Victoria wasn't just fighting for what she thought was a fair share of an inheritance. She was fighting to cover up years of theft and fraud. As I climbed back down from the attic, I realized that grandmother had given me something much more valuable than money. She'd given me the truth and the power to use it. The question now was, what was I going to do with it? I spent the rest of the evening at grandmother's kitchen table, spreading out all the evidence and trying to understand the full scope of Victoria's crimes. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Small amounts at first, then larger ones as she grew bolder. Always carefully timed for when my father was traveling for work or distracted with his business. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of bank transfers from grandmother's accounts to accounts Victoria had set up using variations of grandmother's name and social security number. Eleanor M. Peterson, E. Marie Peterson, Eleanor Peterson. Close enough to pass casual inspection, but different enough to avoid immediate detection. Victoria had been living off my grandmother's money for years while simultaneously complaining that Eleanor was too independent and should be in assisted living. The irony was bitter. She'd been stealing from the very person she claimed was incompetent to manage her own affairs. By the time I drove home that night, I had a plan. But first, I needed to call Mr. Morrison and schedule an emergency meeting. Victoria wanted a war, and now I had the ammunition to fight one. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Victoria's car was gone, probably out celebrating with her attorney, confident that she was about to reclaim what she thought was rightfully hers. My father's car was in the garage, but the house felt empty. I found him in his study, nursing a glass of scotch and staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. "Dad?" I knocked softly on the doorframe. He looked up, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" "I've been better. We need to talk." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "If this is about the will contest, I want you to know that I'm not happy about it." "Victoria." His eyes, "She's very determined." "I know, but I think there are some things about Victoria that you don't know." Something in my tone must have alerted him, because he set down his drink and really looked at me for the first time. "What kind of things?" I took a deep breath. "Dad, did you know that Victoria has been stealing from grandmother for years?" The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" I found evidence. Bank records, forged signatures, accounts she opened using grandmother's information. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, Dad. He sat in silence for a long moment, then buried his face in his hands. "Oh God. Sarah, are you sure?" "I have documentation going back 3 years, and a recording grandmother made explaining everything." "A recording?" I pulled out the small tape recorder and played a portion of it for him. Watching my father's face as he heard grandmother's voice detailing Victoria's betrayal was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do. By the time the excerpt ended, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. "I can't believe this," he whispered. "I can't believe I didn't see it. Grandmother protected you from it. She didn't want to destroy your marriage." "My marriage." He laughed bitterly. "What marriage?" "I'm married to a thief who's been stealing from my mother." We sat in silence while the full implications sank in. Victoria hadn't just been manipulating our family dynamics. She'd been committing actual crimes, and now she was trying to use the legal system to cover her tracks and claim even more money. "What are you going to do?" my father asked finally. "I'm going to give this evidence to Mr. Morrison and let him handle it. But Dad, you need to know, this is going to get ugly. Victoria is going to fight this with everything she has, and when she realizes what I've found, she's going to get desperate." My father nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" The question surprised me. After days of feeling like I was fighting this battle alone, suddenly I had an ally. "I need you to help me protect this evidence, and I need you to be prepared for what's coming. Because when Victoria finds out that I know about her thefts, she's going to turn on both of us." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every car that passed outside made me wonder if Victoria was coming home early. The evidence was safely locked in my car, ready to be delivered to Mr. Morrison first thing in the morning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger. Victoria had been desperate enough to steal from an elderly woman for years. Now that her crimes were about to be exposed, what lengths would she go to in order to protect herself? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about grandmother's strength and wisdom. She'd known this day would come, and she'd prepared for it. Tomorrow, I would honor her memory by making sure that justice was finally served. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat in Mr. Morrison's office with a banker's box full of evidence on the chair beside me. The lawyer's expression had grown increasingly grim as I explained what I'd discovered in grandmother's attic, and now he was methodically going through each document with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent decades untangling legal messes. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, setting down a bank statement showing a transfer of $15,000 from grandmother's account to one of Victoria's fake accounts. "Eleanor never mentioned any of this to me directly, but now I understand some of the cryptic comments she made during our meetings." "What kind of comments?" "She kept asking about protections against financial fraud. What kind of evidence would be needed to prosecute someone for elder abuse? hypothetical questions about asset recovery. I thought she was just being cautious, but she was building a case. Mr. Morrison picked up the tape recorder and turned it over in his hands. "May I listen to the entire recording?" I nodded, settling back in my chair as grandmother's voice once again filled a room, this time revealing the full scope of Victoria's betrayal. The recording was even more damning than I'd remembered. Grandmother had documented specific dates, amounts, and methods Victoria had used to steal from her. She'd even managed to record one confrontation where Victoria had threatened to have her committed if she ever told anyone about the thefts. "This changes everything," Mr. Morrison said when the recording ended. "Victoria's will contest just became the least of her problems. We're talking about felony charges here: grand theft, elder abuse, identity fraud, forgery. The district attorney is going to have a field day with this. What happens now? Now we turn the tables completely. Instead of defending your inheritance, we go on the offensive. I'll contact Patricia Kellerman today and inform her that we have evidence of her client's criminal activity. Victoria can't very well claim your grandmother was incompetent when that same incompetent woman was smart enough to catch and document Victoria's crimes." The phone on Mr. Morrison's desk rang, and his secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Kellerman is on line 1. She says it's urgent regarding the Peterson estate." Mr. Morrison and I exchanged glances. "Put her through," he said. Donald, Patricia Kellerman's voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear an underlying tension. "We need to meet as soon as possible. My client has some concerns about how this case is proceeding." "I was just about to call you, Patricia. As it happens, I have some new information that might affect your client's position." There was a pause. "What kind of information?" "The kind that's better discussed in person. Can you and Mrs. Caldwell be here at 2 o'clock? "We'll be there." After he hung up, Mr. Morrison turned to me with something that might have been a smile. "Your stepmother is getting nervous. My guess is she's realized that contesting the will means opening up your grandmother's finances to scrutiny, and that's the last thing she wants. Should I be there for the meeting?" "Absolutely. You're the primary beneficiary, and this evidence belongs to you now. Besides, I think it's time Victoria faced the person she's been trying to cheat." I spent the intervening hours at grandmother's house, going through more of her papers and trying to understand the full timeline of Victoria's thefts. The pattern was even more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. Victoria hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been slowly siphoning off grandmother's assets and moving them into accounts she controlled, probably planning to claim them as her own inheritance when grandmother died. But grandmother had been watching. Every theft was documented, every forged signature photographed, every suspicious transaction traced back to its source. She'd been building a criminal case while pretending to be a frail old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. I found something else too. A letter addressed to me, sealed and hidden in grandmother's jewelry box. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found my evidence against Victoria. I hope you never had to use it, but I suspect that woman's greed will eventually force your hand. I want you to know that changing my will had nothing to do with manipulation or undue influence, and everything to do with protecting what I've worked for my entire life. I've watched Victoria circle this house like a vulture for years, calculating its value and planning how to get her hands on it. But more than that, I've watched her treat you like an obstacle to be eliminated. The small cruelties, the constant undermining, the way she's tried to poison your father against you. I've seen it all. A woman capable of that kind of emotional manipulation is certainly capable of financial manipulation, and I was right. I changed my will because I trust you to use your inheritance wisely and with love. Victoria would have sold this house within a year and spent the money on status symbols and frivolous luxuries. You'll treasure it and maybe even raise your own family here someday. Don't let her steal that future from you. Fight for what's right, not just for yourself, but for me. I couldn't fight her while I was alive because I didn't want to destroy James's marriage, but I've given you the tools to fight her now. Be strong, my darling girl. You have more courage than you realize. All my love. Grandmother Eleanor P.S. There's one more thing Victoria doesn't know about. In my bedroom closet behind the photo of your grandfather, there's a small safe. The combination is your birthday, month, day, year. Inside you'll find documentation for assets she never knew existed. Consider it my final gift, to ensure you'll never have to worry about money, no matter what happens with the rest of the estate. I practically ran to grandmother's bedroom, my heart pounding. Sure enough, behind a framed photograph of my grandfather, in his army uniform, there was a small wall safe I'd never noticed. I entered my birthday, 04/15/2001, and the safe clicked open. Inside were documents for investment accounts with a company I'd never heard of, containing over $300,000 in stocks and bonds. There were also deeds to 2 rental properties in California that had been in grandmother's family for generations, worth at least $500,000 combined. Victoria had been stealing hundreds of thousands while grandmother had millions, more safely hidden away. But the most shocking discovery was a manila envelope marked insurance policy in grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a letter from a private investigator, along with photographs and surveillance reports documenting Victoria's spending habits and lifestyle. Grandmother had actually hired someone to follow Victoria and document how she was spending the stolen money. The photographs showed Victoria at expensive restaurants, shopping in high-end boutiques, and taking weekend trips to luxury hotels, all while claiming to my father that money was tight and they needed to be careful with expenses. There were credit card receipts for thousands of dollars in purchases made during times when she claimed to be home taking care of household business. Grandmother hadn't just been documenting the thefts. She'd been building a comprehensive case that would make it impossible for Victoria to claim the money had been used for legitimate family expenses. At 1:45, I was back in Mr. Morrison's office, this time with 2 banker's boxes of evidence. The additional financial documents painted an even clearer picture of Victoria's crimes, and the private investigator's report provided proof of how she'd spent the stolen money. "This is a prosecutor's dream," Mr. Morrison said, shaking his head in amazement. "Your grandmother was more thorough than most police investigations I've seen." At exactly 2 o'clock, his secretary announced that Mrs. Kellerman and Mrs. Caldwell had arrived. My pulse quickened as I heard their footsteps in the hallway. This was it, the moment when Victoria would finally face the consequences of her actions. Victoria walked into the office looking perfectly composed in her designer suit and carefully applied makeup, but I caught the flash of surprise in her eyes when she saw me sitting there with boxes of documents. Patricia Kellerman, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, took in the scene with the calculating gaze of someone who'd walked into more ambushes than she cared to remember. "Donald," Ms. Kellerman said carefully, "I wasn't expecting Miss Peterson to be here for what I understood would be a preliminary discussion. Given the nature of what we need to discuss, I thought it was important for all parties to be present." Mr. Morrison replied smoothly, "Please have a seat." Victoria chose the chair farthest from me, but I could feel her eyes boring into me as Ms. Kellerman settled beside her. "Now then," Ms. Kellerman began, "my client has some concerns about the validity of Eleanor Peterson's will, specifically regarding the mental capacity assessment that was performed. We've obtained medical records that suggest—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Mr. Morrison interrupted. "Before we discuss your client's concerns about Eleanor's mental capacity, I think you should be aware that we have evidence suggesting your client has been systematically defrauding Mrs. Peterson for the past 3 years. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the walls. Victoria's face had gone white, but she was trying to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry, what?" Ms. Kellerman's voice was sharp. Mr. Morrison opened the first box and pulled out a stack of bank statements. "We have documentation showing that Mrs. Caldwell has been forging Eleanor Peterson's signature on checks, opening unauthorized accounts using Mrs. Peterson's personal information, and transferring funds without permission. The total amount stolen appears to be in excess of $200,000. Victoria found her voice. "That's ridiculous. I helped Eleanor with her finances because she was becoming confused and forgetful. Everything I did was with her permission." "Including this?" Mr. Morrison pressed play on the tape recorder. Grandmother's voice filled the room, clear and articulate, detailing Victoria's thefts and explaining how she documented them. But it was the excerpt where grandmother quoted Victoria's exact words during their confrontation that hit like a bomb. If you ever tell anyone about this, I'll make sure James has you declared incompetent and locked up in a nursing home where you belong. Nobody will believe a confused old woman over a concerned daughter-in-law. Victoria's mask finally slipped. Completely. Where did that come from? You can't just... This is Eleanor's voice, recorded in her own home, Mr. Morrison said calmly. Along with documentation that spans 3 years, bank records, photographs of forged signatures, surveillance, footage from ATMs where your client withdrew money from Eleanor's accounts using cards she was never authorized to possess. Ms. Kellerman was rapidly taking notes, her expression growing more concerned by the minute. Donald, if this is true... It is true, I said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. My grandmother spent 3 years documenting Victoria's crimes because she knew this day would come. Victoria stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. This is some kind of setup. Sarah probably forged all of this herself. Sit down, Ms. Kellerman said sharply to her client. Patricia, what exactly are you alleging? Mr. Morrison opened the second box. Grand theft, elder abuse, identity fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. To commit fraud, we have enough evidence to file criminal charges immediately. But we're prepared to discuss alternatives, I added, and everyone turned to look at me. If Victoria withdraws her will contest and makes full restitution for what she's stolen, we might be willing to keep this a civil matter. Victoria's face was a mask of rage. You little bitch. You think you're so smart, don't you? Playing the innocent granddaughter while you manipulate everyone around you? The only one who's been manipulating people is you, I replied calmly. And now it's over. Ms. Kellerman cleared her throat. I need to speak with my client privately. Of course, Mr. Morrison said. You can use the conference room down the hall. Take all the time you need. After they left, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The hardest part was over. Victoria now knew that I had evidence of her crimes, and there was no way she could continue her will contest without risking criminal prosecution. How do you think she'll respond? I asked Mr. Morrison. She'll fight at first, try to find a way out. But Patricia Kellerman is a smart lawyer. She'll advise Victoria to cut her losses and take whatever deal we're offering. 20 minutes later, they returned. Victoria looked like she'd been crying, and Ms. Kellerman's expression was grim. My client is prepared to discuss a settlement, Ms. Kellerman said. But she maintains that any financial irregularities were the result of misunderstandings, not criminal intent. The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Morrison replied, but we're willing to listen to your proposal. Victoria will will contest and make restitution for any discrepancies in Eleanor's accounts. In exchange, you agree not to pursue criminal charges. Full restitution, I said. Every penny she stole, plus interest. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. How much are we talking about? Mr. Morrison consulted his notes. Based on our preliminary review, approximately $240,000, plus interest and fees. Call it $270,000 total. I don't have that kind of money, Victoria said. Then you'll have to find it, I replied. Sell your car, cash in your retirement accounts, take out loans. I don't care how you do it, but you will pay back every penny you stole from my grandmother. The negotiation continued for another hour, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Victoria had no choice but to accept our terms or face criminal prosecution. By the end of the meeting, she'd agreed to withdraw her will contest, make full restitution within 90 days, and sign a confession admitting to the thefts. As they prepared to leave, Victoria turned to me one last time. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, it is, I replied. And if you ever threaten me or anyone in my family again, I'll release all of this evidence to the police and the press. Imagine what that will do to your reputation. After they left, Mr. Morrison and I sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The storm had passed, and I'd won. Not just the inheritance, but justice for grandmother and protection for any future victims of Victoria's schemes. Your grandmother would be proud, Mr. Morrison said finally. I hope so. She gave me everything I needed to fight this battle. What will you do now? I thought about it for a moment. First, I'm going to finish college, then I think I'll move. into grandmother's house and start the life she wanted me to have. The life she protected for me. That evening, I sat in grandmother's kitchen, reading her final letter one more time. She'd known this day would come, and she'd prepared me for it in every way possible. Not just with evidence and documentation, but with the strength and courage to use them. Victoria's threats didn't scare me anymore. I had the truth on my side, and the backing of the law. More importantly, I had grandmother's love and wisdom guiding me forward. The inheritance was mine, fair and square. And I was going to make sure I used it in a way that would honor Eleanor's memory and the sacrifices she'd made to protect it. 3 months had passed since that pivotal afternoon in Mr. Morrison's office, and autumn was painting the leaves on Maple Street in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I stood at the front window of what was now officially my house, watching the morning light filter through the oak tree that grandmother had planted 40 years ago, and marveled at how much my life had changed. The final paperwork had been completed yesterday. Victoria had made her last restitution payment, the full $270,000 plus court costs and legal fees. The will contest had been formally withdrawn, and all criminal complaints had been dismissed per our agreement. After months of stress and uncertainty, the battle was finally over. But the victory felt different than I'd expected. There was satisfaction in seeing justice done, relief that grandmother's wishes had been honored, and gratitude for the financial security I now possessed. Yet there was also a profound sadness that it had come to this, that family relationships had been destroyed over money and greed. My father had filed for divorce from Victoria 2 weeks after the truth came out. The process had been swift and merciless. With the evidence of her criminal activity, Victoria had no leverage to demand spousal support or a share of their marital assets. She'd lost not just her legal battle, but her marriage, her home, and her social standing in the community. Marcus had moved out the day after his mother's confession, claiming he needed space to process what had happened. In reality, I suspected he was worried about being implicated in Victoria's schemes. While I'd found no evidence that he'd been directly involved in the thefts, he'd certainly benefited from the stolen money that had funded his lifestyle for years. The morning mail brought a letter that surprised me, expensive stationery with Victoria's monogram, addressed in her careful handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, wondering what she could possibly have to say after everything that had happened. "Sarah, I know you have no reason to read this letter, let alone believe anything I write, but I need to try to explain myself. I want you to know that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. It started with small things, using Eleanor's credit card for groceries when money was tight, borrowing a few $100s when James was between projects. I always told myself I would pay it back, but there never seemed to be enough money to catch up. Before I knew it, I was in too deep to stop. The lies became bigger, the thefts became bolder, and I convinced myself that I deserved that money because of everything I did for the family. I was wrong, and I know that now. I also want you to know that my anger toward you was never really about you personally. You represented everything I felt I couldn't be. Young, innocent, naturally loved by Eleanor in a way I never was. I was jealous of your relationship with her, and I let that jealousy poison my judgment. Eleanor was a good woman who deserved better than what I gave her. You were a good granddaughter who deserved better than how I treated you. I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I can at least acknowledge it. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that none of this was your fault, and I hope you'll find happiness in the life Eleanor wanted you to have. Victoria. I read the letter twice, searching for any hint of manipulation or hidden agenda, but it seemed genuine. Perhaps the first completely honest thing Victoria had ever said to me. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it did provide some closure to a relationship that had been poisoned from the beginning. I was still processing the letter when my father knocked on the front door. He'd been coming by regularly since moving into a temporary apartment downtown, ostensibly to help with house maintenance, but really, I suspected, to rebuild our relationship that had been damaged by years of Victoria's influence. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, carrying a bag of pastries from the bakery downtown. "Thought you might like some breakfast." "Thanks, Dad." I led him into the kitchen, where grandmother's antique table was covered with college textbooks and planning documents for the house renovations I was considering. "I got a letter from Victoria today." His expression tightened. What did she want? I handed him the letter, watching his face as he read it. The past few months had aged him visibly. The stress of the divorce, the guilt over not seeing Victoria's crimes, and the realization of how badly he'd failed to protect me from her manipulation had taken their toll. "She sounds different," he said finally. "Less angry, more honest." "Do you think she means it?" "I think losing everything has given her some perspective she didn't have before. That doesn't excuse what she did, but people can change when they hit rock bottom." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sharing pastries and coffee while the morning sun warmed the kitchen. This was something we'd never been able to do when Victoria was around. Just enjoy each other's company without walking on eggshells or navigating her emotional landmines. "I have something to tell you," my father said eventually. "I've been offered a position with a firm in Seattle. It's a good opportunity, but it would mean moving across the country." My heart sank. Just when we were rebuilding our relationship, he was leaving. "When would you go?" "That's the thing. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "These past few months have shown me how much I missed while I was focused on keeping Victoria happy. I don't want to make the same mistake again. Dad, you can't turn down a good job opportunity because of me. It's not about turning down anything. It's about making sure my priorities are straight. You're my daughter, and I've already lost too many years putting other things first." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You haven't lost me, and you won't lose me if you move to Seattle. We can visit, call, email. Families stay close even when they're not in the same city. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Besides, I'll be busy finishing college and figuring out what to do with this house. Having some space might actually be good for both of us." Relief flooded his face. "I love you, Sarah. I know I haven't always shown it properly, but I do. I love you too, Dad." After he left, I spent the afternoon going through more of grandmother's belongings, something I'd been doing gradually as I prepared to make the house truly mine. In her bedroom closet, I found boxes of photographs spanning decades of family history, pictures of my father as a young boy, my mother in her wedding dress, myself as a baby being held by my grandmother in this very kitchen. But it was the more recent photos that caught my attention. Pictures from the past few years that documented the slow deterioration of our family dynamics. In the earlier photos, Victoria was always positioned prominently, smiling and posed, making sure she was the center of attention. But as time went on, her smile became more forced, her body language more tense, and she appeared in fewer and fewer family photos. The last family photo in the collection was from Christmas 2 years ago. Victoria stood slightly apart from the rest of us, her expression guarded and calculating. Even then, grandmother must have sensed something was wrong. Looking at the photo now, I could see the knowledge in grandmother's eyes. She already suspected Victoria's true nature, even if she didn't yet have proof. That evening, I was startled by a knock at the door. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus standing on the porch, looking nervous and uncertain. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "I just want to talk for a few minutes." "Please, Sarah." Against my better judgment, I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "You have 5 minutes." "I know you probably think I was involved in what my mother did," he said without preamble, "but I swear to you I had no idea she was stealing from Eleanor." "Okay," I said carefully, "but you certainly benefited from it." "I know, and that kills me. All those years of living off money she stole, and I thought she was just good with money, that my father's life insurance and her job were enough to support our lifestyle." "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to pay you back. I've been working, real work, not just the part-time stuff I used to do. I got a job at a construction company and I'm saving every penny. It'll take me years, but I want to repay whatever I can." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. Marcus had always been selfish and immature, but he'd never been actively malicious like his mother. And the fact that he was working construction, manual labor that would have been beneath him 6 months ago, suggested he was serious about changing his life. "You don't owe me anything legally," I said finally. "The debt was your mother's, not yours. Maybe not legally, but morally. I lived in that house, drove cars bought with stolen money, ate food paid for with Eleanor's credit cards. I may not have known it was stolen, but I benefited from it. What does Victoria think about your plan to pay me back?" "She doesn't know. We don't really talk anymore." His voice was bitter. "Turns out when you can't provide money and status anymore, you lose a lot of people from your life." I considered his offer. The money itself didn't matter much to me. Grandmother's hidden assets had left me more financially secure than I'd ever dreamed of being. But Marcus's desire to make amends seemed genuine, and perhaps it would help him rebuild his character. "If you want to make payments, you can. But I don't want a schedule or a contract. Just give what you can, when you can. And Marcus, if you're serious about changing your life, prove it through your actions, not just your words." "Thank you," he said, and for the first time in years, his smile seemed genuine. "That means more than you know." After he left, I sat in Grandmother's living room, surrounded by the furniture and memories of her long life, and reflected on how completely everything had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a college student living in my father's house, tolerated but not welcomed by my stepmother, unsure of my place in the world. Now I owned a beautiful house worth $500,000, had investment accounts that would secure my future, and had learned that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined. More importantly, I'd gained a deeper understanding of my grandmother's wisdom and love. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor, Mr. Morrison, carrying a final manila envelope. "I have something for you that I was instructed to deliver only after all the legal matters were completely resolved," he said, settling into Grandmother's favorite armchair. Inside the envelope was a letter in Grandmother's handwriting, along with a small velvet jewelry box. "My dearest Sarah, if Donald is giving you this letter, it means you've successfully defended our family's legacy against Victoria's greed. I knew you would. You have the strength and intelligence to handle whatever challenges life throws at you." The jewelry box contains my grandmother's engagement ring, your great-great-grandmother's ring. It's been passed down through 5 generations of strong women, and now it's yours. Not necessarily for engagement, but as a symbol of the strength that runs in our bloodline. I want you to know how proud I am of you, even though I won't be there to tell you in person. You've shown grace under pressure, courage in the face of adversity, and wisdom beyond your years. Those qualities will serve you well in whatever path you choose. Use your inheritance wisely, but don't let it burden you. Money is a tool, not a destination. Build a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. Surround yourself with people who value you for who you are, not what you have. And Sarah, forgive when you can. Victoria's actions came from a place of deep insecurity and fear. That doesn't excuse them, but understanding the root of someone's behavior can help you move past the hurt they've caused. I love you more than words can express. Live well, my darling girl. Forever your grandmother. Eleanor, inside the jewelry box was a stunning Art Deco engagement ring, a central diamond surrounded by sapphires in an intricate platinum setting. It was clearly valuable, but more than that, it was a tangible connection to generations of women who had faced their own challenges and overcome them. "She also wanted me to tell you," Mr. Morrison said, "that there's one more surprise waiting for you in the garden shed. Apparently, she's been preparing it for months." Curious, I walked out to the small shed behind the house where Grandmother had kept her gardening tools. Inside, instead of rakes and shovels, I found an easel with a canvas painting covered by a cloth. When I pulled away the covering, I gasped. It was a portrait of the house painted in loving detail from the front yard perspective. But it wasn't the house as it looked now. It was the house as it could be, with fresh paint, a renovated front porch, and gardens in full bloom. At the bottom, in grandmother's careful script, were the words, "Sarah's house, a place for new beginnings." The painting was her vision for my future, her hope that I would not just preserve what she'd left me, but make it my own and fill it with new life and love. That afternoon, I called a local contractor to discuss the renovations grandmother had envisioned. As I walked through the house with him, pointing out needed repairs and possible improvements, I felt a sense of purpose and excitement I hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't just about maintaining an inheritance anymore. It was about building a life. Grandmother had given me the foundation, but the future was mine to create. 2 weeks later, as I packed up my college dorm room for the final time, my roommate Jennifer asked what I planned to do next. "I'm going to finish my degree online while I renovate the house," I told her. "Then maybe graduate school, maybe travel, maybe start a business. I have options now that I never had before." "Aren't you worried about becoming one of those people who just lives off their inheritance?" I thought about the question seriously. I think there's a difference between living off inherited money and using it as a foundation to build something meaningful. My grandmother worked her entire life to create security for her family. The best way I can honor that is by using what she left me to create something positive. That evening, I stood in the kitchen of my house, truly my house. Now, preparing dinner and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into evening. Children playing in nearby yards, neighbors calling greetings to each other, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. This was what grandmother had wanted for me. Not just financial security, but a place to belong, a foundation for building, a life filled with purpose and connection. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "How's Seattle looking? Job starts next month. Can't wait to have you visit and see the Pacific Northwest." I smiled as I typed back, "Congratulations, Dad. I'm proud of you for taking this leap." Another text came in, this one from Marcus. "First paycheck from the construction job. I know it's not much, but it's a start." Attached was a photo of a check for $300 made out to me, and then, surprisingly, a text from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Victoria. I heard about your father's new job. I'm glad he's getting a fresh start. I hope you are too. Take care of yourself." I stared at that last message for a long time. 6 months ago, such a text would have made me suspicious, wondering what angle Victoria was playing. Now it just seemed like a woman trying to find some peace with the wreckage she'd made of her life. I didn't respond to Victoria's text, but I didn't delete it either. Maybe someday I'd be ready for that conversation, but not yet. For now, it was enough to know that the anger and fear that had consumed our family was finally beginning to fade. As darkness fell over Maple Street, I walked through my house, turning on lights in each room and feeling the warmth and security that grandmother had preserved for me. In the living room, her portrait smiled down from the mantelpiece, surrounded by photos of family and friends who had filled this house with love over the decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. I had a house to renovate, a degree to finish, and a future to build. But tonight I was simply grateful for grandmother's love and wisdom, for my father's newfound courage to start over, for my own strength in fighting for what was right. The inheritance had been about so much more than money. It had been about justice, family, legacy, and the power of love to triumph over greed. Grandmother had given me not just financial security, but the knowledge that I could face any challenge and emerge stronger. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.